Good morning, everyone, and welcome. That natural silencing that happened was a cue for us, so we'll take the cue. First of all, I just want to introduce myself. I've met many of you, but not everyone here. I'm Cinnamon Carlarn, and I'm the very proud 19th President and Dean at Albany Law School. And it's such a pleasure to be here with you today, especially with this beautiful room and this incredible sunlight. So it is a pleasure to see so many friends and colleagues gathered here at the state capitol today for another installation of the 2026 Warren M. Anderson Class of 1940 Legislative Series. Now, each year, as many of you know, during New York's legislative session, the Anderson Series brings together leaders from government, from law, and policy to discuss issues that are actively shaping the work of state government. The program honors the legacy of Warren M. Anderson, a distinguished 1904 graduate of Albany Law School and a longtime leader in New York State Senate, whose commitment to public service and thoughtful policymaking continues to inspire these series. Now this year, I'm very excited to share that Albany Law School is celebrating our 175th anniversary. Yeah. And I'll just sneak in a plug that we're doing all kinds of incredible events around that. We had an event in 9 Penn. We're going to be celebrating at the law school, and so please keep an eye out for that because we're going to be doing lots of community-based events to really emphasize Albany Law School's deep commitment to this community and all of the ways that we hope to interact and enrich with the Capital Region. Now, programs like the Anderson Series and the many other events we host throughout the year that bring together thought leaders really reflect Albany Law School's long-standing commitment to fostering constructive dialogue around the legal and policy issues that matter most to New Yorkers. It's also one of the many ways that we prepare our students to be ready to practice, to serve, and to lead. Now, I want to say a very deep and sincere thank you to our fantastic Government Law Center for continuing the important work of the Anderson Legislative Series. Albany Law School and the state of New York both are lucky to have an entity as unique and as impactful as the Government Law Center. For nearly 50 years, so we'll have a 50th anniversary coming up soon too, the Government Law Center has been providing nonpartisan legal and policy analysis on really pressing issues facing state and local government, which of course is now perhaps more important than ever, and also helping us prepare the next generation of lawyers and leaders in the public sector. The Government Law Center is a really significant reason why Albany Law School is ranked the #1 law school in the country for government law. Now, I just want to say I've had a chance to talk to a lot of folks today, and there's a lot of kind of enthusiasm for bringing the Anderson Series back here to the state capitol, and I'm very proud to be part of that, and I'm also excited to kind of hear the conversations that are going to take place. So I just want to say thank you again for joining us, and now I would like to invite up to the podium the fantastic director of our Government Law Center, Patrick Wiles.
Thank you, Dean, and I'll be really brief because you are certainly not here to hear from me. But thank you so much for coming this morning and giving us the audience that we were hoping to receive so we can do more and more of this in the future. I graduated Albany Law School back in 2016. I went straight into state government, and something that I love doing, just as kind of a policy wonk and someone who loved government, was coming to these breakfasts early in the morning, racing here to make sure I got here on time to get CLE credit. And then COVID hit, and these went entirely virtual, and they've been great virtual, and they're a lot more accessible that way. But there's something that you just get from being here in person that we can't replicate online. So we're really thrilled that all of you joined us here today. A quick set of thank yous for me, and then I'll hand it over to our wonderful moderator. A thank you, of course, to echo the Dean, to our team at the Government Law Center. They do the hard work of making everything like today possible. A lot of them are standing and seated in the back, so raise your hands and just make sure everyone can say thank you. Two of our research assistants are here today on spring break, so they probably deserve a round of applause as well. Of course, thank you to our panelists, 2 of whom are alumni, all of whom we're very proud of, so thank you so much for being here. Thank you to Amy Metcalf and the Assembly for making sure that this happened here back in the parlor. Hey, Amy in the back. And thank you to our really generous series sponsor, a gift made in the memory of Sharon P. O'Connor, who was a member of the Albany Law Class in 1979. So we're really appreciative of that generous support to make this series possible. The most important thing I have to say this morning, though, is probably make sure if you're an attorney, you sign your CLE form and you hand it in at the desk on the way out, because I will get yelled at if you don't do that. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to our wonderful moderator today. So thank you so much for coming.
So first of all, thank you. I think this is on. Anyway, not on. Oh, there we go. You would think that I would remember, but I'm very rusty. I'm Liz Benjamin. Used to be a reporter, now no longer doing that. Did it for about 20 years, covered the state capitol for 10 of those years. Some of you I know, and it's been great reconnecting with you in this room and also over the past week when I've been around the Capitol for a while. Now I'm a consultant, do crisis communications and public affairs for a firm called Marathon Strategies based in New York City. I just want to, what we're going to do in the interest of time is have everybody introduce themselves, and we'll start with you, Commissioner, since you sat in the hot seat when you showed up, but sorry. But also, when you do that, if you would just sort of talk about one or two issues related, obviously, to transportation that you're watching as the budget talks sort of heat up, and as we know, the mothership has landed officially this week, and we are off to the races.
I love the fact that we call it the mothership in
Me
New York.
too.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Therese Dominguez. I serve as Commissioner of the New York State Department of Transportation. It's great to be with you all. I'm thrilled to be here. Just as a side note, I wish I could count my CLE credit. But unfortunately, I'm barred in Maryland. So that said, I've been serving as Commissioner of New York State DOT for about 6 years, it's just been an opportunity of a lifetime. We have an incredible team of 8,500 professionals statewide who execute our mission, and it's very broad, very deep, all modes of transportation, we're executing right now on a capital plan at a record level, about $34 billion across the board in 5 years. And this is the last year of our 5-year capital plan. We're looking forward to next year and planning for that. But all of that said, in terms of what I'm looking for this legislative process, we are looking very, very specifically at a number of the worker safety provisions that the governor included as Article 7s in her budget proposal. As I stated, we're executing the last year of our 5-year capital plan, but with regard to worker safety, we've done a demonstration project. I'm sure we'll talk more about it, but the bottom line is that there's provisions with automated work zone speed enforcement and worker assault in particular. Our workers are being assaulted on the job, and we need to protect them. So those are two of the areas that I'm very focused on.
Thank you. Commissioner Frank?
Good morning, everybody. Great to be with you. Great to be back in this room. I was mentioning my first Ways and Means Committee meeting as counsel to Denny Farrell. The famous Denny Farrell was in this room back in, I'm not going to say the date.
97.
The senator probably was in grammar school then,
Sorry.
but it is a beautiful room, beautiful venue to be with you. And I am a proud alumnus of Albany Law, and congratulations to the recent recognition that the Government Law Center has gotten. I will tell you that when I was in law school between 1982 and 85, believe it or not, I don't know, law school is about 2 miles from here, but it was frowned upon to work your first and second years in law school down here. And of course, I did. So it was frowned upon, I'll put it that way. Mm-hmm. So it's great to see the transition, how it's moved, and the activity that the Government Law Center, but I think the law school as a whole has, and the role it plays through state government. And many of my colleagues here today, I hope there's somebody still left in the legal department back at the law school, but many of my colleagues in the legal department are alumni of Albany Law School, and we're very proud of that. So we are, as the Commissioner said, we are tracking the safety legislation. The Thruway is not in the state budget. We are off on our own, relying on tolls and fees and things like that in order to maintain, operate, and build on the Thruway. So we don't have that. We don't come hat in hand the last 2 months to the legislature looking for increased funding. but we track the legislation. There's nothing more important than the safety of our workers and the safety of those traveling on the Thruway. So luckily, we have great partners, particularly in the Senate, but also in the Assembly, but particularly in the Senate, great partners, and they are focused on that as Governor Hochul is focused on worker safety. So we're hopeful that those provisions and those proposals from the governor stay in over the next 2 weeks, but as Liz knows, anything can happen in the
It's like
next
years.
couple of weeks. And let's hope it's only a couple of weeks, right, on that. But look, I'm sure we'll touch on some other issues in greater detail, but I'd say right now that what we're tracking most importantly is the worker safety provisions from the governor.
Senator.
Good morning, everyone. It's great to be with you. I'm Jeremy Cooney, the chair of the Senate Transportation Committee, obviously a very proud alumnus of Albany Law School, and represent my hometown of Rochester, and delighted to be with this amazing panel and all of you. I see so many partners and staff members and friends and colleagues who are here. So thank you for being here. Thank you for supporting the Anderson series. And again, great to be back in person. So Pat, thanks for your leadership there. We're going to have the dean on the floor of the Senate in just a couple of hours. We're going to recognize the 175th anniversary of the law school. So if you happen to be around these parts, make sure you pop into the gallery so we can appropriately celebrate and recognize this milestone for the law school. To your point, Liz, I think when I look at the budget, I look at policy and purse. On the purse side, very pleased to see the Senate One House included an increase of $250 million for the CHIPS program. Of course, many of you hear about CHIPS from all the different stakeholders because this is really what impacts most New Yorkers' experience on our roads. Obviously, I'm taking the Thruway a lot, so Frank hears from me all the time, but it's something that our local roads, our villages, our towns, our mayors are always eager to see an increase because, of course, after difficult and challenging winter seasons like we're seeing right now, how do we fill those potholes? How do we make those investments in sidewalks and speed, safety, infrastructure? It's the CHIPS program. So, and I know that since our friends at DOT administer that program, every dollar goes out every year. So hopefully we can get that number up in the final enacted budget. And then on the policy side, I would agree with the commissioner and the director that worker safety is a priority. The Senate has made worker safety a priority. And I think just to emphasize that, it's really two ways. We'll talk more about it later on, but it's really two prongs. It's the automated enforcement that the commissioner spoke about, which is important to utilize technology to do that enforcement side, as we know that local law enforcement departments have less and less personnel. So we are reliant on that technology to make sure that there is a consequence for breaking our safety laws. But it's also about the workers themselves, and I cannot emphasize this enough. It should not just be the responsibility of the governor, of the commissioner, of the director to advocate for their state workforce. We as state lawmakers must stand up for our colleagues who are doing the work that we ask them to do. So when we talk about $250 million in CHIPS, it takes men and women to actually go out on the roads and fill those potholes and do that work. And they should be able to safely go home at the end of the night enjoying their families just like all of us. So we're going to be working to get that done in the budget.
So let's start, you touched a little bit on sort of the different structures, pardon me, between the DOT and Thruway, and I want to delve a little bit more deeply into that vis-a-vis funding. I mean, I don't know, in the last 24 hours, you probably saw the headline that the state and the MTA are suing the federal government. We've also seen a lot of headlines vis-a-vis gateway is on, gateway is off, gateway is on, gateway is off. So difficult to sort of follow exactly who's on first at this point. But in terms of funding and the challenges vis-a-vis federal versus state, and I'll put this to Commissioner or Director, either one, if you want to jump in, where are you seeing the pain points right now? And also, you know, how are we going to be able to address that given the significant upheaval and unpredictable nature of the current landscape?
So I think it is the primary question moving forward. We had the benefit the last 5 years of a really unique circumstance wherein the Federal Surface Reauthorization Act passed the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the IIJA, whatever you want to call it, with record levels of funding for transportation that we've seen at the federal level in a really long time. And that was matched with record levels of funding at the state level. Governor, legislature, that's how we're executing on a record $34 billion 5-year capital plan. And now, as we're transitioning to the end of the existing surface transportation law on the federal side, we're seeing funding threatened across the board, but not just at, kind of the level of, quote unquote, scaling back on some of the programs that are not in alignment, I would say, philosophically with this existing administration in Washington, meaning a number of electric vehicle programs, things that are not aligned with them philosophically. A lot of the discretionary programs are being pulled back, right? We've got great programs and projects that we have executed at, I think, a national level in terms of investment, meaning reconnecting communities. We're reconnecting communities across the state of New York, I would argue more than any other state in the nation. What do I mean by that? We're taking down old infrastructure and connecting the community back to its existing neighborhoods, or in Albany's case, we're looking to connect it to the waterfront, as well as enhance some of taking down 787 and figuring out what more can be done to actually connect the community to the waterfront and help the communities, whether it's Arbor Hill or on the other side near the port, really prosper from additional economic development that derives from transportation investments. But the big picture is what's going to happen on the federal side with reauthorization. And we have a very, very focused advocacy on the federal level from the state of New York, obviously, wanting to preserve the funds that we do receive. We get about 40% of our funding. Our formula funds come directly from the federal government, preserving that share, but also making sure that it's increased, right? So if they're going to do away, if the Congress, which is what they're talking about right now, do away with discretionary funding and they put more in dedicated formula funds, what does that mean for the states? We want to make sure that New York not only gets its fair share, but we don't lose in any way, shape, or form. We need to gain ground, not lose ground. And that goes to everything that you're seeing across the board. You talk about Gateway. The number of lawsuits that New York is now suing, whether it's on electrification, Gateway, the MTA, with funds being held for DBE, we're winning because the basis for the suits is oftentimes, rightfully, the responses from the judiciary are such that the law is on our side because, for instance, in Gateway, we have a solid contract with the federal government. That contract is in the form of a grant agreement. Those funds have been dedicated and they were issued, and there's grant agreements in place to actually pay the states, New York, et cetera. And so when you look at the basis for these lawsuits, we're winning one by one, whether it's congestion pricing, anything else. So as we move forward, we have a big focus on making sure that we preserve those federal dollars because those are critical and match them with state dollars so that we can continue to advance transportation in the state of New York. And while we're smack in the middle of budget season for this year right now, everyone's eyes are towards this next year, 5-year capital planning cycle. How do we actually make sure of that?
Well, I'm sorry, Commissioner, before, I don't mean to cut you off, I just have a quick question in terms of the 5 years, right? We know, for example, that the pain from the BBB or other federal, decisions is actually a multi-year problem, and particularly when you talk about lawsuits or when we talk about advocacy, there's also the start-stop nature, right, is a problem from construction standpoint.
Yeah, because the cost of it
exactly.
is
Every day,
escalating.
right, it
Yes.
costs escalate. So before we sort of lose this topic, I do want to ask just everyone, I mean, you talk about state matching funds, like the state's capability of being able to match is hampered Because it's not, all the funds are connected. There's no disconnect when you look at the funding landscape in the state. So if we lose X amount of Medicaid funds, for
Correct.
example, then subsequently we're not able to match in the manner that you're speaking of. And I guess this might be a question to both you, Frank, and also the senator, because where do you make up that funding? A, and B, how does that impact the affordability agenda, particularly, I don't think I'm talking out of turn here, that's Thruway. Once upon a time, the idea was that we would remove the tolls from the Thruway, and in fact, we've actually gone in the opposite direction. See my trucking friends here in the audience, and I know that that's a problem. It's a problem for everyone who commutes and does business. So what do you as you look out at that landscape, and we're talking about all these great projects that are being done, how are we going to be able to continue to afford that, particularly when we look in the out years with the many millions to billions of dollars that are not going to come back into the state under this administration?
Chaos and uncertainty is not good for the private sector. It's not good for government, right? And it only ends up adding costs as we go along. Thruway, the good news is Thruway does not receive any federal dedicated dollars. The bad news is we don't receive any federal dedicated dollars. So we have to rely on our tolls. 90% of our revenue comes from our tolls. That's why we need to protect that. As we do our capital plan, it's driven by that. We have the ability to bond. That's what makes us an authority. So that uncertainty, that's not good. It's not good for us. It's not good for those that use the Thruway. It's not good for our stakeholders that use the Thruway. So that's what we worry about. It's not just the government funding. It's tariffs. It's all that other stuff that's been going on that, again, I think under the umbrella of uncertainty and chaos that we can't plan, that it impacts our planning.
And then in terms of the cost, like when we talk about the start-stop and the every day that we delay has a certain dollar amount on it, is there any way to plan for that, or the chaos actually leaves us completely sort of spinning in the wind and at the whims of, in this case, the federal cycle, but also the long-term impacts of things like tariffs, which we haven't even begun to see yet? I think that could be years in the making, even if it's that Congress changes hands in the midterms and policies are reversed. The catch-up period could really be quite damaging. And I don't know if there's any way to plan for that, or if we have planned for that.
So I think the word chaos is appropriate in this circumstance, because not only are we looking at, we were dealing with the inflationary factors across the board. COVID, we're still paying for
Sure.
So much of what, and literally, physically, mentally, and dollar-wise from COVID. And the cost has increased across the board. Material cost of steel, cost of every single material that goes into construction has increased. We've recognized that, but that said, we still have to plan and budget for it, right? We understand everybody tracks the inflationary figures, you build them into your costs, et cetera. Bottom line is it just costs more to do everything. So last year, the governor, the legislature were very gracious, very much appreciate Senator Cooney's leadership. We were given an additional $800 million to our budget to help address some of those inflationary factors. But now you compound that with tariffs, you compound that with, potentially, grant dollars that you were expecting and then they're being withdrawn. So there's all different kinds of mechanisms here that you have to play for, and you do your best to actually balance what dollars you have, apply them to the projects that you have, and shift projects accordingly. But it shouldn't be that way because, for instance, in the Gateway program, you have a contract. Those are signed dollars with a grant agreement for federal dollars to come directly to the GDC, the Gateway Development Commission, to execute the project. So those are dedicated funds. And when you start and stop, of course you have more additional costs. All of that has to be absorbed, which means, to your larger factor, that, how does that get addressed? Is that going to be addressed ultimately by the federal government in 4 to 5 years, or is that going to be addressed now by the states? The states have already committed. New York and New Jersey have already provided their commitment. Everyone has signed. So if the federal government is actually looking to, increase costs on this, there's going to have to be an absorption factor at some point in time.
Senator?
Can I just add a point in here? I agree with everything the commissioner has said. One, putting my economics hat on for a moment, there's also an opportunity cost that is not being discussed,
Realized.
which is that we do our obligations. So the legislature makes a priority, the governor works with the governor, and then DOT has the obligation to provide these matching funds, which means we put resources, state resources aside to match whatever the federal grant program we're getting. Well, if that money's not being able to be executed because there is no federal match to it, it's just sitting there. So what are we not doing? Because we're waiting to follow through on, as the commissioner rightly said, a legal contract. So I think about in Rochester, the Interloop project is a priority project for our local government, certainly for me, and it's, again, one of these reconnecting communities programs. Under the leadership of Governor Hochul, she has committed $100 million to that program. The federal government, under the leadership of primarily Senator Schumer, committed an additional $100 million. Now, we believe that we will access those dollars, but it's being caught up in this uncertainty and that chaos, as the commissioner said. So now $100 million of state resources is sitting in an account, but we have needs across the state for capital needs across the state. But we don't want to take that away because we want to be able to match our obligations. So we're being the good actors here. We're following the rules to make sure that New Yorkers can benefit from these programs. But when we don't have a partner at the federal level, that makes it very difficult.
I think there's also a significant, and again, I'm not saying this from a political lens, but a reality. The Senate used to be run by the Republicans with a leader who was an upstater, Joe Bruno, and showing my age. I'm sorry that I outed you, but I just couldn't help it. Because you're older than me, so it makes me feel better. Sorry. And once upon a time, Senator Libous, Senator Bruno, et cetera, in the GOP majority advocated for equity, right? So we're talking a lot about the MTA. And of course, it's like the largest understood public transit system in the state and certainly, I think, in the nation, if not up there. And we're talking about the mayor of New York City who wants to make buses free and all this stuff. And we know that the subway system needs significant investment because it's crumbling and flooding and falling apart. That said, the Republicans used to say, great, whatever you give to the MTA, upstate roads and bridges need parity. I don't believe that balance exists anymore. And so the question is, what is the interplay between downstate and upstate, particularly, and I know that there are folks in the room very interested in this, particularly when we look at the public transit system that so many people rely on in the urban centers, but let's just be frank, you don't have public transit in the Adirondack Park, largely.
Well, all I can say is thank goodness for Majority Leader Andrea Stewart-Cousins, who recognizes that there is a balance to be had. Obviously, she represents the city of Yonkers, and so she understands.
Not upstate, just to say.
Listen, I didn't say that. Shelley Mayer were here, she would agree with you. But I will say she understands that, where areas that don't have access to the MTA, don't have as robust of an infrastructure build out, that's a challenge. I think it's oftentimes my colleagues in the legislature in both houses will say, well, New York City gets all this money for, the second half subway or what we're doing now with some of the MTA's capital program. I say, yeah, but they have infrastructure they have to maintain. That's a good thing. We want to make sure that that's a robust and well-funded system. But upstate doesn't have that same level of infrastructure, but we need to start investing in that. And so I always give the example, I know it sounds a little trite, but when we're at the Senate retreat, I remind people, and I'm doing the transportation policy conversation, I remind people that if you miss the subway or you miss a bus in the city, you start tapping your toe around 6 minutes. Right? Like, what's going on? This is ridiculous. I got to get to work, right? You miss the bus in Rochester, you're waiting 40. And by the way, you're outside, right? And by the way, you have a bag of groceries, or you have a small child next to you. How can you create the promise of what good public transportation is without the resources to change that system? And we can do that. And again, credit to the Senate here for putting in a 15% increase to STOA. state operating
proposal?
in this one house budget. Because what that actually does is it goes to frequency of those routes and expansion of those routes. So if you're in Syracuse or Buffalo or Rochester or even here in Albany with CDTA, right, we can get these routes going out further, we can get more buses on a more regular schedule every 15, 20 minutes, right? And then you increase the ridership, right? People start relying on transit like they do in New York City. So I agree that, there's a legacy of upstate support
Yep.
For infrastructure and investment. This governor certainly understands it, being, of course, from Buffalo, but there's more work to be done there.
You bring up a really interesting point, which is a really interesting point, which is there's a circular argument here, right? So people say, well, I don't take the bus in Rochester because the bus only comes every 40 minutes. And you're like, wait, but if we invested in the bus in Rochester and it came every 15 minutes, then actually we would have increased ridership. Then you could make the argument to your colleagues, we have increased ridership, we need to make the investment. But because we're not making the investment, the transit system doesn't come isn't reliable, and then people don't take it, and there isn't the ridership, so you have no
Want to come
argument.
to the budget hearing next year?
I do
'Cause I'd
not.
love to-
Thank you, though. I covered many of them, and they are long.
But you know what's interesting though, Liz? You mentioned Mayor Mamdami's push for the free buses. What that said to me, even outside of the concept of the physical ask of free buses and the challenges with that, is that public transportation is a generational asset, right? Meaning that we have a younger workforce, people who are valuing public transportation at a higher level than we have seen in a long time. So much so that he made it one of his priorities in his mayoral run. I think that, obviously there's a density of population in New York City, but I think if you extrapolate that out, that same value set exists in upstate communities. And so we hope that our upstate mayors, our town supervisors, working with their state representatives on both sides of the aisle, can really prioritize that, because look, we are hyper divided. We're going to have a robust conversation later today on some of the environmental conversations that are happening in the halls of Albany. But transportation is something where we can actually all come together on. And I think that is actually positive. And I think to your question about affordability,
Yeah.
if we can address affordability through transportation, I think everyone can kind of get on board with that.
So put a pin in that, because I think that there are some places in public transit where it dovetails with environmental policy that not everybody is actually unified. Frank, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off earlier.
That's all right, Liz. I would just make the point I make to downstate legislators, particularly New York City, when they talk about, free tolls, no penalties or violations when you don't pay, is that we're off on our own, we rely on our tolls, and if we didn't have that, then there'd be $1.5 billion that would have to come out of the budget, and that's money that's not going to healthcare, housing, and education.
I do have a question. So with the advent of the touch-free tolling, or whatever we call it, automatic tolling, are you seeing, and for the penalties when somebody blows through that goes back to the Thruway? Is that right?
Yes, it's interesting. Cashless tolling, right? It's been a great, it's modernization of the Thruway. It's had great benefits. It's made the ride quicker and safer, and it's been great for the environment. The unintended consequences, right, that we always worry about with legislation is that we have seen an increase in toll evasion, and we've seen an increase in trucks hitting bridges. Why? Because they used to go through the toll booth. They couldn't get through the toll booth. They weren't going to be able to get on the Thruway.
Oh, they were interesting, right?
Right?
Yeah.
So we've seen that. We've been plagued by that in the last 3-4 years. It costs a lot of money when one of these trucks hit the bridges. So cashless tolling, it's been good for the environment. It's been good and convenient for folks, but it has had some negative unintended consequences.
Fiscally, does that balance out, though? Does the benefit of cashless tolling balance out with the unintended consequent expense of cashless tolling? How much does it cost every time a truck hits a bridge?
It can, if it takes out a bridge, it can be $6 million out of our capital budget to repair a bridge. So I think it's working. Look, the reality is we're modernizing, we're not going back, right? We're not going to put toll booths back. Right. So we have to deal with that and use technology as it progresses to make it better.
I am just curious, if in fact you had your dream budget, what would be the one thing that you were wishing, Commissioner, that you could get out of the legislature, out of the budget and the governor this year? If there was something like this, my wish list, my top priority wish list, which probably isn't going to occur, unfortunately, given our fiscal constraints.
So,
Other than the inner loop.
you know, the funny thing about the Interloop project is that it's proven, right? We already did the first part of the Interloop. We know that it's a great solution. And this is the second part. This is the Interloop round 2. And so, yeah, I think the bottom line is that there's so much need in transportation funding across the board. I wouldn't want to be in a position to pick one over the other. We have needs across the board that serve, and I don't mean to be Pollyannish about it, but literally, whether it's transit or any other element of our program, it all boils back down to me to safety. So it doesn't matter. Our goal is to make sure that we move people safely, efficiently through the entire transportation system. So whatever you're taking, whatever mode, we're making sure that it's safe for you to use as a consumer, as a rider, a driver, whatever you're wheeling through, whatever you're doing in transportation. We want to make sure that it's safe. But to do that, we need to make sure that we take care of the people that actually provide the transportation network itself. And so if you ask me, I want to enhance the level of safety that those folks are provided. There's technology that's out there right now that we can further leverage to keep our workers safe on the roadway. There's additional technology we can leverage to inform drivers of how fast they're going. All of these have consequences, and I'm not advocating for one over the other, but the point is that safety is the key factor. The number of, we had the opportunity to install this work zone speed camera enforcement. It's a proven technology. 30%, work zone intrusions have gone down by 30% where we have a camera in a work zone. We've not seen an actual work zone intrusion in construction sites where we have a camera. The bottom line is that people see the signs, they're slowing down. If they're repeat offenders, they're getting tickets, and it's changing behavior. That's great, but it's not constant every day. It's going to be now in spring, we're all going to be on the Thruway or some other state road, and there's going to be a lot of construction because the construction window in New York State is very small, right? We have a short amount of time to get out and fix our infrastructure. But people's lives are literally on the line every day. And just for context, yesterday I was down in Long Island. We were doing a memorial for someone who died 20 years ago, one of our highway maintenance workers, commemorating and honoring his service with his family. And 2 weeks before, the same exact residency, where our highway maintenance workers work out of, call it a yard, we had a guy that was hit. He was out in the work zone because a drunk driver had crashed on the Long Island Expressway. He went out to set up the work zone so that the police could do the investigation. Another drunk driver came and hit him and almost killed him.
Wait, 2 drunk drivers?
2 drunk drivers. So when you talk about the multi-factor thing that's going on, it's not just distracted driving. That is huge. Phones in the car are just deadly. But we need them for GPS and everything else, right, to actually maneuver. And our cars are completely reliant on technology now. But at the same time, there's the human factor of everybody that's out there working. And so you've got impaired, drunk driving, all of these other factors that are still going on the human behavior side. A lot of that I don't have jurisdiction over.
Right.
But we do have advocacy to point it out.
What is you've both spoken about the safety provisions in the budget, or you all did. What's the fiscal on that, on what's been proposed? The fiscal, is there a fiscal impact? Because we're looking at
The fiscal has already been expended. So we were already granted in 2021 the ability to implement the pilot for automated work zone speed cameras. We put those in. Last year, we were given additional authority to expand the program. We're expanding the program. This year, we're asking, instead of just doing it on controlled access highways, allow us to do it on secondary roads, basically, so that we can put more cameras in. And, you know, like, this is, I don't mean to say this, but in Rochester, the first 45 minutes when we installed work zone speed cameras, we had a camera that went up in Rochester and Arundecoit on Route 104, and we had one on the Long Island Expressway. Within the first 45 minutes, somebody blew through the work zone on the Long Island Expressway going 139 miles an hour. 139 miles an hour, where people were working actively in a work zone. In Arundecoit, they blew through at 141 miles an hour.
What's up with people in Rochester?
But it's
That's in
everywhere.
Senator Brooks' district, District 55.
But it's everywhere.
Mind the laws in 56.
Which is why he's such an advocate for it. So I'm just saying, like, it's just,
Yeah.
you know, it's like everything else until, just like cashless tolling. You know, now it's kind of become second nature because you just drive through, you've got the easy pass. But if you're gonna get a ticket every time you go through a work zone, it needs to cognitively hit you.
I don't think that anybody, I can't imagine, unless I'm talking out of turn, that the budget's going to get held up on
No.
worker safety improvements, right? Like, I don't think anybody's going to be like, well, no, that's not good. And also, I should note, the move over law is also, so, I mean, we see routinely that members of law enforcement and also tow truck drivers and EMT, folks, anyone who's over there in the median, or in the shoulder, rather, or in the median, I guess they could be, is at danger of being mowed over by not just people who are just not paying attention, distracted,
And the
et
Senate
cetera.
actually included language
Yes,
in our
I saw
one
that.
house to increase the fine for failing to move over. And, you know, that's something that we hear from law enforcement
All
and
the
first
time.
responders that they're seeing as they're responding. People are just zipping by right next to them, and they don't have the benefit of signage and you know, roped off
Or
areas.
cameras,
They're just
yeah.
walking right there. So that's going to be an issue. I want to just highlight one other thing. Since we're
Please.
with a wonky group of folks, I want to just highlight an issue that the Senate is putting forth in our one House budget to kind of build off of what the commissioner was saying with enforcement technology. This legislature and governor worked together previously to create school bus arm stop cameras.
Oh, yeah.
Right, we obviously know that children are also distracted and walking in the street, and we want to make sure that when that yellow school bus extends its stop arm, that people are indeed stopping and allowing a child to either walk across the street or maybe if they wander into the street, not be hit. I think everyone can get their heads around that. We did that, we created it. There are certain vendors out there that work with local municipalities, counties and towns and cities to administer that program. We did that, but the fact is, a year and a half later, there are over 100,000 tickets that have been issued that have not been adjudicated, meaning that in Long Island, the Hudson Valley, and upstate in Rochester too, there are tickets that have been sent to a driver that had sped through a camera. We have them on picture. They challenge it, but the local courts will not calendar it
Why?
because they say that's not their responsibility. They never opted into it,
So
or they never wanted to do it. So we're trying to work on language right now. The Senate included in our one house to mandate that they at least calendar it for an appeal. But that's now become the workaround, right? So now, oh well, I'm on Long Island. I got this camera. Well, it was really my fault. I'm just going to challenge it. Now I don't have to pay the ticket, and it's only going to take a tragedy for this to really kind of blow up. So we're trying, rather than respond to something terrible, let's kind of work on some of these issues legally. And I think this is an issue that we're working with the OCA specifically on to
Yep.
encourage them to work on it.
So, okay, so again, I don't think anybody's gonna, the budget is not gonna get held up on that. Not gonna get held up on workforce safety. I know, I have seen stranger things. I know, it's possible, right? Everybody's like, whew, we got the big ticket items done, and then the budget
Don't
gets held
jinx
up
it.
on some weird random thing. Okay. What I think that the big ticket items that we're talking about right now, CLCPA and the governor's changes, which she's gonna put on the table at some point soon, hopefully. And then also, I would say oddly, but maybe that's not the right word, seeker reform, which has been a real big issue. So both of these things, I think, have some kind of interplay with the transportation sector, and I guess Senator, we'll start with you. I mean, when we say, oh, everyone can get on board with, the environmental efforts that we've made to try and reduce the impact, because one of the things that I think we don't talk about a lot is the impact of transportation and the built environment and all of that actually on climate emissions is pretty significant, perhaps more significant than people realize. I mean, are you concerned about, I guess, what the governor's going to put on the table and how that is going to impact transportation and your ability to reduce emissions and transition to clean energy going forward? We'll start with you and then we'll work our way
I'll
down.
take a highline view. So first of all, we haven't seen
No, I
what
know.
the governor has
No.
proposed, but I think something that's getting lost in the conversation is that the governor is still committed to the goals of the CLCPA. And so the question is there flexibility to achieve those goals at a later date, or how are we measuring those goals? I wasn't in the legislature in 2019 when the bill was first voted upon, but I've said consistently and supported that we need to be moving in this direction. But there's a practicality that's out there, and that's why I've been involved with kind of looking at specific aspects when it comes to, for example, clean trucks. Recognizing that I think 94% of all the commerce in New York State is still done by trucking. And Frank, correct me if I'm wrong, but there still is not any publicly available charging infrastructure for trucks. So not I'm talking about level 2, not level 3, but actual, the big trucks that we see along the Thruway available at any of the Thruway stops. So what does that say to the legislature? We have to make sure that we're investing in that charging infrastructure. We can't just tell trucks all of a sudden, okay, you got to get from Plattsburgh to Binghamton, and there's no place to charge, but good luck, right? I mean, that's just not helpful.
Right.
And so you'll see that the Senate put in, for example, additional dollars for charging infrastructure, working with NYSERDA and others. We're also hearing this in the school bus context, right? There's a requirement that we move our school bus fleets to all electric vehicles and buses, and there's a lot of feedback we're receiving from local school districts about that. We put $100 million in our budget to help build up the infrastructure. But then, of course, it ties into some of the other environmental conversations around our grid and readiness. Can we actually connect the charging infrastructure that we need to build can we get delivery of power to that? Again, I think we're all rowing in the same direction. It's just how quickly that boat gets to the goal, right? And I think that's the challenge.
Right, so let's say that, and again, I'm totally hypothetical, we don't know what the governor's going to do, there's a lot of reporting and speculation and all the things. Let's say that the timeline does get moved, recognizing also the CLCPA was passed at a pre-COVID, like a completely different world, right? We might as well be in a different universe. How is that going to, when we go back to the funding challenges that we started talking about at the beginning of this conversation, how is that going to impact your decision when you're like, I'm allocating scarce resources, Thruway, DOT, and the CLCPA goal, well, we're all rolling in the right direction, and we know that we want to reduce our climate emissions and use more, I don't know, green cement, for example, which is more expensive, right, if you're going to be doing infrastructure projects. But then you have to make a decision, oh, well, now we've moved this goalpost over here, so maybe we're not going to opt for that because it's more pricey, and I have to, how's that going to impact your decisions when you're making, when you're dealing with scarce resources and you want to do the right thing, right, but you also have to be a good steward of public dollars?
The guidance I look at is that we can streamline this and not cut corners. I think that's the point here. I think we can be environmentally conscious and responsible and still be effective and efficient in what we do. So what does that break down to? We look at the technologies available. We're looking at EVs, the biggest impact to us. So we're looking at our own fleet. We're looking at providing chargers. Thruway renovation project, which was just completed last fall, all 27 service areas that were completely renovated through a public-private partnership, $450 million, no taxes, no toll money used for that. And we've invested in that in terms of for passenger vehicles to make sure that there's sufficient charging at those places. The next level now and the next is on the medium and heavy duty. And that's a question of what is the trucking industry, what are manufacturers doing? Some of this just doesn't exist out there from the manufacturers right now. And again, I talked about before that turmoil and that chaos. that's impacted them and what their plans are, right? You pick up the business page of any newspaper on any given day, and they're talking about how car manufacturers are
Rolling back.
re-looking at what their plans are, right? So you have that. So you have that as a challenge. You have a challenge from the utilities and the power that they can provide. Utilities have said to us, trying to provide the power to any one of these service areas to put in this heavy and medium duty charging is the equivalent of a small city. So how do we deal with that? How do we do that? That's part of the bigger, right, discussion here in New York about utilities and power available. So that's how it's impacting us on a day-to-day basis. But we look at it, we try and evaluate this. How can we be supportive of the governor's focus on being environmentally sound, but do it in an effective and efficient way?
Commissioner?
So, I'll start with the funding. So when we talk about some of the federal funding that was made available under the bipartisan infrastructure law included the National Electric Vehicle Initiative, the NEVI program, right, to electrify fleets around the country and to encourage EV charging. So right now, we're just trying to spend all of the federal money that was actually given to us. We are going great guns to do that, and I have to say we've been successful so far, and we're going to continue to do that. And where we're being challenged, we're literally litigating. But the point is that when you look at New York, had a really interesting model for doing this. We've partnered. It's state DOT, NYSERDA, NYPA, all working together with all the various charging programs, leveraging all of the dollars that are on the table. And the plan that we put together was really build out the gap, fill in the gaps on the existing electric vehicle charging system across the state, either on or near within a mile of the Thruway, right? So that we've got 87, the Thruway, the city taken care of from an EV perspective. That's the first level of investment. And then the remainder of the plan really focuses on medium and heavy duty charging. And we want to get there. We want to get to the medium and heavy duty infrastructure investments. Frank was great about articulating exactly what some of those challenges are, but we need to get there. In order to actually have it, we need to be able to put that infrastructure in. And we wanted to match those federal funds with some state funds that NYSERDA and NYPA have to actually put it all together. In the meantime, we're facing these challenges, that are omnipresent, whether that be manufacturers and their schedule for delivery on medium and heavy duty, but you still have companies that are committed to doing it, and they're going to help find a way. And so continuing our commitment, whether it's on the exact time schedule that was originally articulated in 2019 or not, is what's important. Demonstrating and moving forward, in my opinion, is what is going to help us get there. And that's why I think Governor Hochul is indeed committed to all of this. It's how do we do it in the timeline that we have available to us. So the other thing that we're actually looking at as well is how much can we invest in transit to help offset that. So the zero emission transit transportation program, otherwise known as ZET, is something that we've put in place to make sure that outside of the MTA, how do all of the non-MTA transit systems across the state access additional funds to go low emission or no emission fuel?
So if this were a debate, we would now go into the lightning round period because we have literally 2 minutes, I lied, and I know everybody has to go to work. So unfortunately, we're not going to do that. And what I'm going to do is like a Frankenstein question, and I'm so sorry. So Senator, we'll start with you. I do want to touch on the seeker, piece because I do think it's important, and it could very well impact or maybe even speed, depending, right, when you strike a balance between responsible environmental oversight and the ability to deliver projects, particularly when you're talking about that start-stop timeline that is a result of litigation, delivering projects that New Yorkers need for a whole variety of reasons. And final thoughts, which is a mashup, and I'm sorry, but unfortunately we're pressed for time.
Very, very quickly, I support the governor's let them build agenda. I recognize that we've come a long way with seeker over the 50 years, and a lot of the protections that we talk about now, wetlands protections, that didn't exist when that law was first started. So I think we can recognize that it takes 56% longer in New York to build, and we are falling behind other states when it comes to transportation infrastructure, housing infrastructure that we need to keep citizens here in New York. Kind of what's to come outside of budget, charter bus safety, terrible accident on the Thruway last year outside of Buffalo. Got to do something on that. I carry a bill with Chair Magnarelli on the Assembly side. Fringe benefits, talking about affordability. How do we make accessing public transportation more affordable for New Yorkers by giving a pre-tax credit to employers to offer to their employees so that they can take our buses and use bike share programs? And then we talked about impaired driving. Commissioner talked about that on Long Island and across the state. We're seeing that. The Senate added in resolution language in the one House budget, recognizing it and saying that we're committed to working outside of the budget on increasing penalties for those who do endanger themselves and others on the roadway. And then finally, because I see Rob Gibbon in the audience here, I would be remiss if I wasn't saying, we have to dream bigger as a state when it comes to transportation. I know our commissioner and Frank certainly agree in this, and I always want to talk about high-speed rail, but we'll save that for another conversation.
That's a whole hour-long conversation. Frank?
I would just say, I think the main point I learned, it's not just a Thruway. Any transportation system is interconnected. It's connected to state DOT roads. It's connected to public transportation. We've got to continue to use technology to make those roads safer and to make those connections more efficient.
Commissioner, last word and first word. You got the first and last.
So with regard to seeker reform, I think that, how we look at it, it's important that we actually review it. This is something that can actually, especially in housing, and we're talking about transportation right now, but housing is directly, if we do any kind of, transportation, transit-oriented development, we're building all of this transportation to help facilitate people who are living next to these opportunities so that they're reducing their greenhouse gas emissions, walking, biking, taking transit, et cetera. And so if we're able to build housing, which is a key commodity and necessary for the growth of the state of New York, and the focus here on the seeker reform is about that, how do we make sure that we're doing that? And if that proves the concept, if we're able to do it, then we should look at how would that translate to transportation as well. But in the interim, there's elements of it that can be actually streamlined, including some of the permitting provisions that we all have a role in. So that would definitely be, something to look at. And I'm sorry, what was the second?
Any parting thoughts?
Any parting thoughts? First and foremost, a thank you to Albany Law School. Anybody who's taking the time to come here this morning beyond your CLE credit, I really do appreciate your interest in transportation. It really is critical to absolutely the underpinning of everything that we do in our economy moving forward. So don't take it for granted, because that's exactly what we all do as Americans in particular. We always think that we have a safe and a strong infrastructure system to live in. And when you brought up the question about funding at the very beginning, to bring it full circle, what we're looking at the federal level now is half of what the bipartisan infrastructure bill. The Congress is now looking at least a 50% cut in funding for transportation moving forward. So the challenges are real.
Thank you. And I managed to 2 minutes over, so I'm sorry for 2 minutes, but I do appreciate everybody's attention and being here. It was a robust discussion, and I appreciate that from the participation, and of course to Albany Law. Thank you so much, and thank you for being here. Have a great day.